Hi, I'm Mike Schwab, the author of Ways We Enjoy Magic Cards and the creator of Ways We Mage. My goal is to help bring magic to more players, and I'm trying to do that through a combination of pushing my ideas out, but also bringing other people's ideas in. And the book is a way for me to send a bunch of information out pretty efficiently. And the site Ways We Mage has a lot of lists of content that bring a lot of the efforts that people have already done to organize the information and find the best and categorize what information you need for different pursuits. Trying to add a layer of organization and a directory and a formatting tool that um, will help people deliver that information in the most efficient way, so that if you want to learn, or if you know somebody who is ready to learn but doesn't have a lot of time, the goal of these projects is to help them get up to speed with sort of like the minimum reasonable amount of effort, to kind of skip over a lot of the crufty stuff and go to content that's either evergreen or fresh or just outstanding in some way. So I have been really excited about connecting with people, just with a love for community and connecting with people who have a love for strategy. And I realized that showing people how I make these tools might be a cool way to connect with even more of you. I know that there are a lot of incredibly, bright people who are in the community, but there is actually, I think, a big dis, disjoint community, because Magic Online is Windows, and most of the people who do the type of programming that I do use Mac. So this could be a cool sort of view into how I have grown up using this tool set over the last 15 years, and how I have developed my techniques of doing my work and doing my research around the tools that are available to me here on this platform. The task that I'm going to be doing today is adding cards as kind of a first class object in my schema. So right now, the first class objects in my schema are things like lists, list items, paragraphs, chapters, and books. So those things can all be kind of connected to each other, because that's why I use the term first class item, because it has kind of its own presence that makes it easy to connect it to other things. And the framework that I use, Rails, makes it pretty easy to add new models, which can be that kind of first class tool set and those abilities, and a bunch of easy ways to manage the relationships that items in the real world, appear to have. So by making cards into a first class item, I can basically tag a list, say, okay, this list is related to this card, and with the system that I have now, I can put lists, or I can put cards into lists in this form. So when I add this class MTG card, that activates a script that I got from this development team called the Munson's apps. And so this script is working well for me. It's pulling images from gatherer data, and I have been using it. I'm pretty happy with all the formatting, and I had to edit the script a little bit to get it to work with my stack, but it seems, oh, I wonder why that's not being shown. Maybe there's no comma in this thing. So what I have there is basically a system for making the cards visible, but it's not tracking them. One of the main things that I can gain by making cards into a first-class object is, like, if I know that this article is talking about Samet and I click on Samet, then I can see other articles that are also about that card. And I knew that that was probably going to be a feature that I needed for this, to achieve the goals that I have. But one of the techniques in this type of programming is to try to not bite off too much until you need to. So I kind of delayed that project until now. I was showing this app. I was showing this page to a friend, and he was like, "Yeah, it would probably look better with some more images." So he suggested that I put the images in full view rather than just having them on hover, and I was like, "Yeah, I wasn't sure which way to go." And now I'm ready to take a stab at that. So the question of how to do this is a little bit interesting because since every card has a unique name, the names are a unique way to look them up, and that's why scripts like the Munson's app can work, because once you know the name of a card, you know exactly which card is being named. And so there's also a numeric ID in the gatherer data. That's another unique way to identify the cards. And in a Rails app, each model gets a unique ID, which is just a database tradition in general. Rails builds heavily on top of that tradition of having a primary key, which is just an integer. And so what I'm saying is that when I choose which pieces of data are going to be stored for the records in this model, it's likely that they'll have several unique IDs. And there might be some cool reasons for me to not do that duplication. If I used the gatherer ID as my key as well, then it might make it easier for other developers to integrate with my site. And for example, they could, if they had an article about a certain card, like Mirror Wing Dragon, they could create a link to my site. Let's say the ID of Mirror Wing Dragon in the gatherer data is like 16,095. They could come to my site and say card slash 16,095 slash articles, or I call them lists, and they could just link right into my app. And since those gatherer IDs are something that they can get from APIs at any time, that might be pretty simple to develop for them, actually. Another option is if I could have kind of that would be kind of an alternative way to access this stuff. So instead of giving them this URL, it could be something like that. And that way I could use the Rails convention of generating IDs automatically through the database. And I'll tell you why I have a little bit of a inclination to use that. I feel like setting. Okay, so normally when you use these ID numbers, the goal is to not care what they are. The goal is to just treat them as what's it's like these ID numbers are managed automatically. You're not supposed to really need to deal with them directly. And there's some benefits you can get from being more agnostic about it. I'm not explaining this well, so I'm gonna move on. Another way that I think I might potentially benefit from having my own ID field is that the gatherer, if I don't know if this is the case or not, but if the gatherer data uses the same number for multiple editions of a card, and we wanted to have content that talked about foils and masterpieces and modern masters cards. I guess so in an article about modern masters, for cards that have new art in that printing, it would be nice if our imagery would show the correct art rather than showing that card from a different edition. I'm actually not sure offhand if Modern Masters has any original art, but those are some of the questions that occur to me when I'm designing my data model. But when I start to get that far down the road, I also have to remind myself, like, don't overthink it too much up front. And often it's best to just tackle one problem at a time, build a sort of minimum viable framework for solving that problem, and then just having faith that in the future, when you do tackle something else, you will understand it then. The reason for that approach is because when you try to plan out too much in advance, you can't really imagine things correctly. can't really imagine what the site needs to do until you're actually using it. And that's something that I've experienced really directly in the past week or two of working on this project. As I've been adding content to the lists, I've been noticing a lot of features that the lists need to have. And so I've been really enjoying that process, and I trust that process. On the other hand, I also do believe in having some kind of data design upfront to leverage the work that people have already put into these other data platforms. So with that in mind, let's continue on to look at the data that we're going to be using. So I've researched this API and a few others already. This one, Gathering IO, this one I think is from Wizards. I'm not sure if it is officially run by them or not, but this is a pretty cool API with some great client libraries already available. But the issue here is it doesn't, from what I can tell, okay, so there is an image URL here. The multiverse ID, that's the existing unique ID that I was referring to. Okay, so I was completely wrong that this data source didn't have images. It does. On the other hand, Scryfall I think it's possible that Scryfall has better images. I don't know if I have any evidence for that, but the reason I think it might is because they also include these large sizes and a ping. So here they're referring to a ID scheme, an ID scheme, which is universal. This is the collector number, basically. This is the number within the set that Wizards has given to the card. So currently in my application, well, okay, so I don't have any of this data stored in my application. So they give you the multiverse ID, Magic Online ID, and then down here, okay. So I'm wondering how I can actually okay. So it might be possible to send queries into this API and then get back IDs from that. That way I wouldn't have to like preload my system with all 17,000 cards. But since the number of cards is actually pretty manageable from a database perspective, it kind of makes sense to me that I would be able to load them all in. So another question that comes up, that occurs to me is how new cards will be welcomed into the system. when they come out, because obviously one of one of the most important um, features that I can offer. Basically, is supporting new cards right when they're announced. Um, if I have to do maintenance on the data to support that, that's likely the path of least resistance in terms of developing the technology to support that. But if I can make it so that my data has a fallback of querying some other source, then I might be in a better situation where I can go out into the community during those times and send people to the site rather than um, having to do maintenance to update the the newest cards that I want to be available. Um, so that actually might cut in favor of the Scryfall data, um, because I know that Gatherer is at this point, I think Gatherer is only updated once a week. So being able to support spoiler season might, um, I'm going to tweet at these guys to ask. Okay. Can you add cards to the API daily, or are they only available once on Gather? Okay. They might have an FAQ here. Promo card. Okay. Doesn't look like they've addressed this here, but so I hope that you can already get a sense that in this crossover realm between API technology and magic, there are some really talented people out there, but overall, these systems are kind of underdeveloped. I think that what has happened with magic is that a lot of resources were deployed very early because the the growth of magic coincided with the beginning of the internet, and throughout the history of the net, there's been very high performing communities online. And when you deploy something that early, like look at MTG Salvation and look at the technology that they have at their disposal. It's a message board type system It's a type of system that you used to see all over the place, kind of like a BB, PHP BB, I think was the name of the platform that those were often built on. And because of the structures and paradigms that people used to build those, they're not that easy to update. And it's very daunting to try to undertake a project that big. So when you have something and it's kind of like if it ain't broke, don't fix it type status, then the I guess the payoff for doing something like this is lower because those systems are kind of insular. They're not going to be great at integrating across a RESTful interface like the one I described with this imaginary URL scheme. You'll notice in some of those older systems the URL schemes aren't as pretty as this. They're not as structured, and they're not as predictable. This year, I've noticed that on Wizards of the Coast site, the mothership, the URL schemes have gotten a lot more structured. And unfortunately, some of their older links are not working anymore. But, and because like I said, once you have that system and it has been in service for such a long time and it has grown into so many corners of the room, as it were, it becomes difficult to bring everyone along when you move into the next house. Or when you upgrade the house, sometimes you have to clear out some of those mossy corners in order to get a new air duct coming in. So some of those URLs that were serving, like for example, I was looking up novels and books about magic, novels, and there were some links on Wikipedia that were they were like citations basically for where they got information about this list of novels, and those links weren't working. So it's funny because the novels are also like a discontinued part of the system. It's almost like a perfect analogy that like they changed the novels into the story blog, and now the links to the novels are not even in service. But that's one of the things that I'm trying to preserve with Ways We Mage is like all of that goofy stuff that we did in the 90s was not that long ago. Like you can get those novels for like $3 a piece, but that might not be true forever because the collectability of the early Magic memorabilia is starting to really peak, and so I wanted to give my visitors a real kind of a little bit of a nudge, like buy those things, read them, like let's figure out what we have on our hands here. Anyway, so I was expecting this video would just get straight into coding, more or less, but it's interesting to show you guys this part of the process too, because I do like to take my time when I'm picking technologies to integrate with. There's a lot of clues that I can see about whether something is likely to work as advertised, whether it's likely to still be supported or might have started to decay, and whether it whether it will be easy for me to determine what it does and doesn't do, whether it will be easy for me to contact a real person if I have a question that I'm not able to answer just by searching, whether I'll be able to look through the code myself to try to solve problems, or if that's not likely to be a very fruitful thing for me because of the way this system is written. But I'm happy to say that both of these systems that I'm considering seem to be really very promising on all those metrics. I've already had a discussion with a Scryfall engineer on one occasion, so I'm confident that they can be reached. I mean, I do try very hard to use restraint when asking for help with somebody else's project, but in the Magic community, I'm a little less wary because I know people are generally kind of gung-ho to collaborate. And I also think it's very unlikely that they're being overwhelmed with support requests from other angles. I don't think there are that many people developing projects against this API yet. And in fact, that might be kind of a red flag because this one may not work as advertised. So what they have here is they have their example system. It appears to be actually using the API. These are not just canned examples, but they are. It's implied that these are actually hitting the API. Let me see if I can. Okay, data URI is right here. So if I change this data here, and I tell it to get a different set, like Mirage, let's see if that actually changes what it gets. Nope, it's still got time spiral. Okay, it's possible that it was referring to this. I don't know. It looks like they are actually going for a live query here. Okay, so this is the data for Mirage. And happily, that seems to work properly. But I do think it's quite possible that this API is not fully functional because I don't think it's being used very much. And when okay, so I'll rewind a second. There are a significant number of websites that access this data, and I don't know very much about how most of them are built. So I might be wrong about how much this API is being used, but my understanding is that it's quite new, and whenever a system is it hasn't been fully put through its paces, it's typically the case that it has weaknesses, and often, like even in a professional setting, those things can persist for years and years before they're all ironed out. Now, with regard to this data set, again, it's very structured, it's very discrete. there's a certain number of cards. There is some messiness that I alluded to with like the different editions of cards, and there's if you're a hardcore collector, there's definitely some fuzziness of like in the early sets for like Arabian Nights and Legends and Antiquities, there was differences between the first run and the second run. So like that type of stuff is those are the types of fuzzy questions that don't have a clear answer that you will run into in development of most real life applications. Things like addresses, payments, names, and I don't know, even email addresses. Like these things have a lot of nuances and details that are pretty ambiguous that you might not realize until you've had to try to teach a computer how to understand them the way we do. Those things are very messy, but this data set is pretty clean. Like one of the weirdest things about this data is changing the word cut to ribbons into the cut / ribbons that Wizards uses for. Okay, so the split cards in general, and aftermath cards, those do present possible weirdnesses, and it's interesting that the digital products display them differently. So you know the aftermath cards, they only have like a half size art box, but on the digital products like duels, they have a full piece of art, and on Magic Online as well, they have a full frame of art for each half. So there is a level of specificity that can't be just described by this multiverse ID. So it's like, okay, that's the card you're talking about, but are you talking about the paper or the digital, because the imagery is different. So thinking about well, let's see if we can do an example. Okay. So maybe we can start by getting a set like Amonkhet, and then so we can start by getting the sets. Look for Amonkhet. We can get Amonkhet by using this one, and then maybe we can use this one, cards, to get some cards from Amonkhet. Okay, so downloaded this gem the other day. So let's take a look at this documentation here. And look at the usage. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move into my project directory. I'm going to start a console. And I'm going to require this gem. Okay, so that didn't. Sometimes. Okay, require Ruby gems. Okay, So I'm not sure how to structure this require statement. What I'm going to try instead is actually getting my project to load the gem for me. So I'm going to open my project, go to my gem file, and I'm going to tell my gem file that this gem is required for my project. I'm going to use bundler to kind of update the other gem file. And then I'm going to restart this thing. And then go back to, all right, so let's try to run this query. Okay, so it connected, pulled a bunch of data, probably in different languages here. And I used pretty print to structure that out a little bit. I'll go ahead and get another gem awesome print. That might, I'm not sure if it's called AP or if it's actually called awesome print. Huh, okay. I think I got the wrong thing here. So I'll show you what I am going to do here. I'm going to look at Ruby gems. Okay, Associated Press. Whereas awesome print, yeah, that is the gem that I was thinking of. And I can scroll back through recent commands by, okay, yeah, so this is not printing this structure out as I thought it would, which is probably because it's not, so this is not just a data structure that I'm looking at. This is an object instantiating a class which happens to be printing out a bunch of attributes which are pretty much structured data structures. But they might not be, I mean, the fact that Pretty Print got it is a cool sign because it knew how to at least do indentation to show the hierarchy of how these data are being nested, and but it doesn't do the coloration that awesome print can do. Well, that's okay. For now, we can try to okay. So the question is this image URI good enough for what I want to use it for? And that is really not as crisp as what Scryfall can offer. Like looking at, so if I can actually grab that multiverse ID, and then go into Scryfall. Cards may contain the fields. How do I actually look them up? Does it have to be through the set? Is this my, okay. Fuzzy search, exact search, autocomplete, fetch 10th edition, fetch send, okay, multiverse, there we go. So card slash multiverse slash multiverse ID. So and you see this is actually very similar to the it's very similar, except I could just use multiverse. They came up with almost the same scheme as I imagined. Okay, so if we select that data, we got the right card, we got Avacyn. And then let's look at the images. So they gave image URI, and then image URIs, small, normal, large, and ping. And so if we look at the large one, okay, so the color is not right, but the accuracy of the pixels is pretty nice. And then if I look at the ping, it's the same data here with the rounded corners. So looking at this data, it also has rounded corners. Let's see what kind of a file this is. I don't know what ASHX means. Let's see. I'll just save the image. Okay, so it looks like it is a ping. So this is, okay, this is the gatherer data. This card is going to look the same in this data set as it's going to look in hundreds of other websites, which is probably a good thing. Just to be sure, let's look at what their normal sized image looks like here. Okay, it's the same scan. but it's quite nice. Okay, so looking up cards from their multiverse ID, and then this string here, I believe, is a ID, which is, it's kind of an internal ID to the Scryfall system, but they've turned it into a letter number combo, possibly for like security reasons, and also possibly just so that it can be clear to the developer whether you're using this ID schema or this one, because that can be obnoxious if you have like, oh man, this is card number 4000. I don't know if it's this ID schema or that one. Then you have to double check everything before you do your work. So that could be another reason for that type of nomenclature, as it were. And then find flying artifacts with power greater than 8. Okay, so from what I've seen of, okay, so the Gatherer Advanced Search is quite good. But from what I've seen of Scryfall, I think it might be able to express some types of queries that Gatherer is not. It's a pretty bold claim, so let me see if I can back that up. Not sure if Gatherer can do this, differentiating between card mana costs that have more mana symbols and less generic mana. Not sure if Gatherer can do this. Let's see. It doesn't have the not equal. It's an interesting type of query. Show me all wizards that do not equal 4. Okay, this looks like pretty much all queries that Gather cannot do right here. I wonder what Pakula is. Does Gather allow flavor text or lore? It does allow flavor text. No surprise there, really. And these look like potential strengths of this system as well. Okay, so there are some wizards that don't cost 4 mana. $502 of them. Let's see how many there are that do cost 4. Only 125. I thought 4 was the sweet spot for wizard. Maybe 3. Can't be 2. 192. 143. So yeah, wizards are pretty evenly distributed along the lower part of the curve. I actually thought they were a little pricier. Okay, how many wizards are 1-drops? This is a good test for you guys, see if you really know. I'm going to say 29 appeals to me for some reason. No, I was wrong. 56. Almost exactly twice as many as I suspected. Oh, the guild mages are wizards. Merfolk wizard. I actually kind of like this card. It makes a nice game. I think it's a good skill test card. And it's kind of good in mill. Okay, so Scryfall. Scryfall does have more images, the bigger images in particular. It's possible that Gatherer might have a bigger version of this image if I were to just craft this query better. Like I could add like size. Let's see. This is image size. I'm not anticipating being able to find information about this API very easily, but might as well try. Ooh, there it is, size equals small. Okay. Size equals large. Okay. Size equals small. Okay, that worked. Size equals full. Huh, that sort of worked. Size equals medium. Okay, so let's see, size equals meaty. Okay, so if size, okay, so I think what I'm seeing here is that if I type in a term that is not recognized by their language, it'll just give me the image normal size. But if I type in one that is recognized, then what they're showing me is that this particular card doesn't have an image in that slot. And so it's like that data source is not being really maintained. Let me Gather is a little flaky today, but don't hold it against them. Sure, it'll be full strength soon. Okay, so this image, yeah, that's the same resolution. And I understand that Wizard sometimes does want to tone down the resolution of images to prevent people from counterfeiting them. Looking at the images that I can get through here, They look a little better than those. I feel like these have better resolution, but could be imagining it. And when I look at the script that I'm using to it's going to exactly the same place to source the image. Where was that gatherer link? Did I close the window for... Yeah, this handlers thing, yeah. So let's look at what's going on here. Okay, so this looks like the same resolution we just saw. These could be at that resolution. So that image is here in MTG Goldfish's system. It's about 220 by 311 pixels. It's a square image, but it's mostly... No, it's a square image. There's no transparent corner. It's a JPEG, so it can't really have transparent corners. Okay, so when now seeing this, what I'm starting to assume is that this is probably the best images that are available. Although Scryfall could be the answer here. Let's look at their data again. And first of all, I wonder if I can do it without this. Okay, that's nice. So what if I go into just a number here? That looks pretty darn nice. That definitely looks way nicer. Text is just unmistakable. And I'm thinking that AKH, the newer stuff is gonna... Okay, so yeah, they're scanning cards. I know that that's part of their shtick. So these images are definitely better than the gatherer data. And I think that, you know, this is actually, so I mentioned earlier that there's a relatively low number of people who are deeply into Magic who use Macs, because even though you can run Windows on a Mac, it seems like not very many people go that route. And I'm sure the screens on a lot of the Windows computers are at high resolution now, but Macs have been at high resolution for laptops for a long time, and so there's a bit of a. It's possible that some of those people still use computers that don't really show a difference between that image and this one. But this is really pretty. There's a lot more detail there. I'm convinced. And if I go way back in time to Visions, Visions might not have had 200 cards. Let's go to 170. Access denied. I remember that card so well. I had dozens of them. I used to buy so many packs of Visions. So I was trying to collect the complete set. Remember when people used to do that, they thought that complete sets were value. So yeah, I had a ton of these cards and I didn't think it was very good. It's a little frustrating to see it out there. Let's try again. A ton of these as well, but the art, oh my god, so interesting. This is an art style that I don't think I've almost ever seen on other Magic cards. Now, they could be showing my age there that I took a pretty significant break from the game for a decade or so, but yeah. Oh, and this is by the venerable Therese Nielsen, one of the top names from what I can tell. And with good reason. I mean, this is a mesmerizing piece of art right here. Okay, so the Scryfall data is where it's at. So let's figure this out. Okay, so the other question that is on my mind is about interface. And how is a card going to be tagged into a list? So one of the tricky things about serving this type of data into an interface is that the kind of level one is a drop down. So a drop down list with thousands of card names in it is not a good interface. It is a good level one interface, and it might be good to have that for backup purposes. But it's not a good primary interface. Another one is autocomplete. Now that can often be good enough to be a primary interface. And we could have something where it's like you click a button to tell it that you're going to enter a card, then you type it in. There is another cool possibility though, because all of these cards have unique names. It will be possible to kind of passively scan the text that the person is writing and find the names of the cards that they are writing about, and then fetch their details from there. And it wouldn't even need to really integrate with this API. So Scryfall has a standing, they have a policy that they ask you to rate limit your requests so that you don't hit their API more than 10 times a second. So if I were to do some kind of text analysis where I took everything that people typed and ran it through their API to find any card names, that wouldn't really be in line with what they have asked of the community. So fortunately, I already have another data source, which is a file that I got from MTG JSON. Put it in here. Yeah. So I have here all the card names. I don't remember if I took all the spaces out of these names or what. I think that probably is what happened. But I think it's plausible that I could use this data set to find when people are naming cards in their article. The thing is that even that interface would need additional buttons, because just because somebody is mentioning a card in their list doesn't mean they want their list to be tagged with that card. It's close, but I think that is in terms of the accuracy that I want to see out of these features, that would be akin to something like a false negative. Like, if somebody mentions Stormcrow in an article, doesn't mean the article is about Stormcrow. Now, it might be fun to be able to search for all the articles that mention Stormcrow, because a lot of them, might be reasonably good jokes. But it would also be cool to be able to search for the articles that were actually about Stormcrow and come back with a high quality list of like 5 or 6 articles without having to sort through hundreds of others that are actually not on that topic. Or Lightning Bolt, maybe that's another good example. There are some cool articles about Lightning Bolt, no doubt, but there are also lots of articles that mention Lightning Bolt, which, given the opportunity, or given the choice, rather, would not probably tag Lightning Bolt as a topic of the article. So, and then there's sort of kind of a level 3 aspect to this, which is like thinking about how this behavior of the system will influence the behavior of the user. So if people know that their article is going to be tagged with every card that they mention, and they don't want their article to be tagged with Lightning Bolt, what are they going to do? Well, they might do something like misspell the name, like Lit Bolt. I don't know if you guys remember, like, that was a nickname. I don't know if that was something that a lot of people said. Or see, when we started playing Magic, the internet was just this tiny little thing that like most of us didn't really know how to navigate. So, and Magic, like, there were no spoilers online. It was like, or few of them. It was hard to find information about the cards, and that was by design. Something that Richard Garfield thought would be a fun puzzle for people to solve in person. Um, so it's pretty meta to see how that challenge that he created has played out over the years. And I don't think there's too many vestiges of that policy still um, that are still active, but it's possible that what we see, what I've described with this sort of um, the fact that a lot of these tool sets are kind of only halfway there. I mean, don't get me wrong. I think that a lot of the teams like MTG Goldfish and many other sites have been really ramping up their um, mastery of the opportunities that this technology gives us. But like, look at this, like Star City Magic Sealed product. Is this a reasonable interface? Not really. It's alphabetical. There's no way to sort by year. Stuff that's out of stock is displayed right along with things that are in stock. And this is a system that hasn't been updated for a really long time, or at least this part of it hasn't. This interface hasn't changed since I've ever started using it. So I think it's an interesting moment in the community when these things are starting to get upgraded, and that's what I want to be a part of. I want to give these people a shout out and say, like, hey, like, we're ready to support you through this process of rearranging this room and rebuilding this house, and it's going to be worth their while because the power that you're going to be able to leverage, I know that rebuilding a system is not always a good plan, doesn't always work, and sometimes there are more than enough reasons to keep using something when you have a big business. You keep using something that works because you have other things to pour money into that are going to leverage you more. But at the same time, a lot of these systems that I see around the web, they're not big businesses. And I think that ramping up the technology is going to pay off for some of them because the user base is becoming savvy to the difference between a really old school thing that has a bit of a clunkadunk and something that is more like Web 2.0. Anyway, in order to access these images, okay, so assuming that I start with my list of card names, and I can go back to MTGJSON and get a complete list of card names with spaces in them. I can create my data set, and then I can run it through this API, a few cards at a time, to gather their images. And then they gave me permission to hot link the images, which means that I can use this URL. I can use a I can load it from a Scryfall server. And so I don't need to store images. I don't need to copy them. So all I need is this little actually all I really need, okay, so I think this is optional. That might actually, okay, so that I think is something that they use to say which version of the image it is, because they do update their images if they get a better version. But it looks like the structure of this URL is based on the collector number. So this is card number 5. And I guess 5B is going to be the back side of the card. So that's so awesome. I do have one of these cards, but I've never played it, so I haven't really seen the back of it that much. I know it's ridiculous, but I haven't gotten to play all that much the past couple years because the store where I play, they had to cut back their event schedule, and then I didn't make it a habit to start going to another store yet. But Avison, you know. Not the hugest, dugest fan of this card, but I understand that mythics have to be powerful once in a while. So there it is. So I don't need to store this whole URL. I really just need to store, I need to have this piece and this piece. But on the other hand, I might as well just kind of take the whole thing. I think from what I can conjure up right now in my head, it's kind of 6 of one and half dozen of the other. I mean, it's kind of like if I have one, I have both, because Rude makes it pretty easy for me to parse this data out of the longer one. Whew. It's after 6 a.m. And I'm gonna pause the video in a minute just to make sure that I have enough hard drive space to save it. So I think the scheme is going to be that I'm going to run through the MTG JSON data to query Scryfall and gather this data. And then I'm going to store those purchase URIs are actually pretty juicy. Haven't really decided if I want to put purchase links onto my interface. I think, and this is interesting that they have the Scryfall as the UTM source in these links. So that could be kind of a way for them to monetize their work. And if I were to use this data, I would be sure to ask them if, well, I might be a little shy about asking them if I could change that. So that's kind of their, that's their revenue. So, but more importantly, I don't think I would probably store this data in my database. I think if I decided to pursue that in the future, I would either build something that queried their thing in real time, or I would update my schema at that point, maybe pick whether I wanted to have all 8 of these shopping centers or just a couple, just one. And um, and then I would add probably 1 or 2 fields to my schema rather than like, I mean, it would also be possible to store this whole thing in one field and then have, there are ways to get JSON to tell the database to actually read JSON now. So there's no longer kind of a hard line between structured data and JSON data. There are databases that can do both. So it wouldn't necessarily be that onerous to store a lot of this data. In fact, it might. Some data designers would think that was a good plan to just suck in this whole thing, and you could even put this whole structure. This is all just strings and a couple integers. So this is all JSON right here, and these arrays. This is all JSON. You could put this all right into a single field in the database, and then you could query it out using these keys. That could be a pretty decent line of thinking. It's not the database tradition that I came up in, and so my inclination is to pick out 5 or 10 of these fields and put them into my schema and just hang on to that data and discard the rest. And if I need it, I'll come back for it. And part of the reason why I like to do that is because I think it makes it somewhat easier for me to create queries that reach through multiple scopes. And like, okay, so this is rarity mythic, right? So if I were to create a feature on my site where I was like, okay, so you can search for listicles that are about mythics, I think it might be the case that that query is easier for my database if I have separate columns for each data field rather than pushing all the data into a single JSON object. But I'm not positive about that, and it might be a good thing to research. Now is a good time to check something like that, because this big piece of data could prove beneficial to have all that at my disposal. Now again, like, I think top8.com. What is this going to get me? Deck lists from okay. This is some kind of snark. Okay, so after all that waffling, I still feel pretty confident in my plan to use structured data and to only grab a couple fields and the image URI, and then it will be possible for my system to display images persistently instead of just on hover, and have really great imagery there. That looks great on high resolution screens. And the interface for when to tag a card in a list, I think having it be passive is actually quite appealing. So when the person types in a card name, it will present them like, do you want to tag this card in this post, rather than having them have to use some kind of special syntax to put like card : Archangel Avacyn. I think the passive interface is preferable to having a syntax. I mean, they could also have a syntax that they could use, because a lot of people are systematic like that, and they don't mind marking up what they're doing. But yeah, I'm not sure how that interface is going to work out, but we'll get in somewhere.